Yeah, I think I'll just stand here. Um, that was that?
Not working.
Yeah, okay. I'm not looking at it, so. Okay, that momo char was very spicy, and yummy. So just to let you know that this what you're seeing here is being recorded, and this will be shared via a Himalaya program website. So just wanted to let you know that it is being recorded. Of course, the audience we won't see the audience, but the event itself is recorded. So I'll just go ahead and start. Tashtile, welcome. On behalf of the Himalaya program, I would like to welcome you to this event. And today we've gathered here on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. And as a program, we have found a home here on this Musqueam land, and we hope to be in relationship and in good relationship with the Musqueam people, and trying to do whatever we can to make that happen. But also, this is not to excuse ourselves or not enough in terms of what we need to be doing as a good relative and a good visitor, or, and in many cases, settlers here. So with that being said, I would like to welcome Dr. Chering Shakya to give us a brief introduction of the Himalaya program and this event.
Thank you very much, Pasala. Namaste and Teshitelek. Welcome to UBC Himalaya Program's annual lecture. So the UBC Himalaya Program is a collaborative work of professors and researchers and academics who are at UBC, who are work on the Himalayan region, from Ladakh in India to Kashmir to Nepal, Bhutan, and Tibet, Sikkim, and sometimes we expand towards Northeast India, which sort of trying to be expansionist, playing bigger slides of the Himalayas. And sometimes we go up north to plain Pakistan and the Karakoram range also. So Himalaya is also expanding. This Himalaya program consists of myself. I'm in the Department of Asian Studies and in School of Public Policy, and my colleagues, Professor Sarah Schneidman, who's in Department of Anthropology and in School of Public Policy, and a colleague, Professor Pasan Sherpa, who's in critical indigenous studies and in the Asian studies. And one of our colleagues is absent, Professor Mark Churin, who is also in critical indigenous studies and in Department of Anthropology. So we've been going for nearly a decade here at UBC and organizing events related to Himalaya. And our annual lecture series, this is the fourth lecture series we held, and we're this year very fortunate to have Professor Mukta Lama, who will be introduced to you by my colleague Sarah Schneidman. Can you introduce our guest speaker today? And can I just say, there's a sign-in sheet being circulated. Can you please sign your name? This is to justify to UBC why we serve food and who's eating. The expenses all has to be counted. So please sign in. And also, if you haven't visited our website, please visit our website, UBC, and sign in for our mailing lists there. We don't send sort of bulk emails. We just unobtrusive and occasionally good news about events that are happening in UBC and the Greater Vancouver areas related to Himalayas, and you will be very informed about events relating to Himalayas. So please do subscribe to our mailing list if you can. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yes. And one of the things initiative we had started is summer we have a language program for Tibetan and Nepali language program, which is a very exceptional way of teaching language. We have morning, we have a teaching in a classroom. Our two teachers, Binu Shrestha and Sonam Rinchen, I hear, who've been teaching for the last 10 years, our summer language program. And we have a morning classroom. In the afternoon, you go out with our community members, Tibetan community, Nepali community, spend the day and practice the words and terms you learned in the classroom. So we called it community engaged language learning, and it's been very popular. And if you're a UB student, if you haven't registered, please look up our Tibetan and Nepali 390 Asian Studies comes under, and do see if you can encourage others to register for Tibetan and Nepali language. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tserang and Pasang. And yeah, just to follow up on that too, Tibetan language will be offered in May this year in summer term 1, and Tibetan language, and Nepali language in summer term 2, right, in July. Yeah. So thank you, everybody. My name is Sarah Schneiderman, and I'm a faculty member in anthropology, as well as here in School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. And I'm actually on sabbatical leave. And I was saying that this is my first time back on campus in several months, but I wouldn't have missed it for anything. And I'm very pleased to have the chance to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Mukta Lama, this evening. As I said, I wouldn't have missed it for anything because I have known Mukta for about 25 years, I realized. We were actually colleagues in graduate school together at Cornell University, where we both studied anthropology. And so in a sense, we come from the same lineage. As we often say, we're chelas of the same guru or of the same teachers. And so that brings me even greater appreciation to have known Dr. Lama over time, to see how his work has developed and grown as he has become one of the foremost voices in anthropology, speaking about indigenous issues in Nepal today. And to have him here at UBC, where I've now been for 10 years, has been a very special pleasure. And he's been here as a policy practitioner fellow through the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. I also want to acknowledge ORIS, the Office of Regional and International Community Engagement, which works with that program and is also a co-sponsor of the event this evening. So as I mentioned, Mukta completed his PhD research from Cornell University and subsequently returned to Nepal, where he has been engaged in teaching through the Central Department of Anthropology at Tribhuvan University, as well as in several public policy and advocacy roles, both with development organizations as well as the government of Nepal. He has worked with ILO as well as NFDIN, which is the National Foundation for the Development of Indigenous Nationalities, as well as the Ministry of Federal Affairs and Local Development. And he's currently an advisor to the Indigenous Nationalities Commission in Nepal, which is engaged in drafting a national policy for Indigenous peoples in Nepal. And he has been engaged in related work on those themes while here in Canada, and I believe thinking a lot about some of the comparative experiences in this part of the world as well. And so very interested to hear about how that is also informing his take on the issues that he's going to speak with us about today. He's also carried out major national level studies on social inclusion in Nepal, and I've been privileged also to work in collaboration on some related projects. We've worked together on a project about affirmative action in Nepal and India over time, as well as on a couple of more recent projects that have to do with disaster resilience from perspective of marginalized and vulnerable communities. So there's a very broad scope of expertise that Dr. Lama is bringing to you today. And as I said, it's been a pleasure to be engaged in collaborative conversations and research over time and to see some of that coming to fruition. So today's talk focus is on the idea of dreams of equality, as I understand it, the long-term aspiration for people in Nepal to reach a framework of equality, but then also a set of reflections on what has actually happened in the last 10 years since Nepal's constitution was promulgated in 2015. And again, as Tsering said, we're very pleased to welcome Dr. Lama as the speaker for the 4th annual Himalaya program lecture. This is a series that we've been hosting where we are very pleased to be able to host speakers who come with diverse expertise, but also ways of connecting with a broad range of community members, students, and scholars. So thank you all for joining us here for this special event this evening. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Lama to begin this evening's talk. We'll have about 45 minutes, I think, and then a chance for Q&A and discussion at the end. So please do stick with us and bring your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, very much for your kind introduction. At first, I would like to thank the UBC Himalayan program for inviting me to this annual lecture. I'm really grateful, and I would like to extend my appreciation to distinguished scholars, Professor Snyderman, Professor Chiring, Sake, and Professor Pasang, and other colleagues here who have done a tremendous work on furthering the studies in the Himalayan region. I think the region, Himalayan region, deserves to be appreciated on its own terms as an important space and source for scholarship and learning within Asia. I'm very pleased and truly honored to be here with you all today, and thank you very much. I would also like to join in acknowledging and expressing my gratefulness for the opportunity to be here on the traditional, ancestral, and ceded territory of Musqueam people. As a person belonging to indigenous Tamang people from Nepal, Himalaya, I would like to express my solidarity and support for the historic journey of reconciliation that is ongoing in Canada. I firmly believe that the meaningful application of the reconciliation process will be an inspiring example for promoting justice for indigenous peoples in other parts of the world. In today's talk, as has been mentioned, I would like to invite you to reflection on the Nepal's federal constitution. I thought this would be an apt moment as the year 2025 marks the 10th anniversary of the promulgation of the Constitution of Nepal on 20th September of 2015. This was a historic milestone, concluding a prolonged period of political transition that began in 2006. More importantly, this is the first constitution written by the elected representatives of the people, which inscribed in it the sense of constitution written by the elected representatives of the people, and give the sense of we, the sovereign people, as you can see in the preamble of the Constitution. The Constitution abandoned the centralized and unitary system of governance, acknowledged the state's role in ending systematic inequality and oppression against the marginalized social groups, restructured the state into a federal democratic republic, and promised inclusive state, society, and democracy. In particular, I would like to focus on the idea of equality. There are three reasons for this. The first is that the concept of equality is one of the essential components to inform democratic constitutionalism around the globe. Constitution by itself doesn't make a country democratic if the idea of equality doesn't exist. We know the cases when the constitutions are being used as tools for the authoritarianism or even fascism. Equality is rooted in the notion of the inherent dignity and universal moral worth of every human being. Equality is foundational to the idea of justice and freedom, and it forms the bedrock of the rule of law. It is the notion of equality that makes the legal norms and law a mode of regulation applied to all legal subjects alike. In contrast to the previous constitution bestowed by the oligarchs to the people of Nepal, this constitution has allocated more space for the concept of human equality. This deserves, I think, appreciation and reaffirmation. The second reason, I believe, is that the concept of equality constitutes a core aspects of politics and democratic mobilization in Nepal. The desire for equality and the end of inequality is expressed in various registers, from everyday folk prose and songs to promises made by a variety of political actors. The concept of equality inspires collective action, which in turn offers a new experience for the participants. I suggest that these experiences gradually transforms subjectivities of the individuals involved. When people openly assume that all human beings are equal, it becomes apparent that unequal material distributions and the hierarchical social order are a product of history rather than fate or natural necessity. It prepares participants to refuse the subaltern position in the hierarchy to which they have been assigned. When equality is presumed, the process of emancipation begins within an individual. I term this transformation in subjectivity, driven by the idea of equality, a subtle revolution. The constitution-making process in Nepal was made possible by this revolution. This phenomenon deserves a careful examination. Who wanted equality? Anybody who favors a change in Nepal is attracted to the idea of equality, especially those sections of the population who experience colonization, historical discrimination, and marginalizations, such as the poor, women, Dalits, and indigenous peoples, find themselves intensively captivated by the concepts of equality. The exception might be segments of the ruling families and their allies who own and benefited from the Gorkhali state and felt responsible for upholding the hierarchical order that they established. Contrary to their view, the people who experience oppression and domination see the existing social order as unjust and dream of a different future. They participated in various social and political movements before, during, and after the Constitution, demanding equality. Guided by this dream, a dream in the sense of hope, as in Martin Luther's expression, I have a dream, exploring the experiences of people who aspired to such a future for a better understanding of concept of equality in practice is the last reason I think we should look at this concept. The entry of the term equality into the public sphere in Nepal within the context of democratic discourse can be traced back to the second half of the 20th century, in my observation. But after the return of the autocratic monarchy in 1960, which ruled until 1990, the preferred phrase in the official narrative was not equality. In the school textbooks that I read, Nepali society was described as having aman chain, or roughly meaning peace and happiness eternally, where all people live in harmony with each other. The national identity was founded on the concept of bir, or bravery, of the country which was never colonized. These official ideas provided comfort and pride to the young children, but they vastly contradicted everyday experience. The grinding poverty, painstaking physical hardship, and the blatant injustice and discrimination faced by many ordinary people was a paradox of the textbook narratives. In early 1980s, when I was in high school, I first encountered the concept of equality and alternative ways of describing Nepali society. One day, we heard that the students from Tribhuvan University, who had started organizing students in unions, had come to our school and organized a meeting with interested students in the evening. It was highly risky then, during this period, that any activity deemed against the existing system would be faced with violent suppression. Hence, the meeting was organized in the clandestine location on outskirts of the settlement. In the meeting held late evening in the kerosene lamp, the student leaders described this need for student union. The ultimate goal was to transform a society marred by inequality and discrimination. In the later half of the program, they presented a song with guitar and madal drum. The song reads, Gaita badio ढुङ्ग्रोमा मोही छैन, गरिबको चमेली बोल्दिने कोही छैन. रातो भाले धुरीमा करायो, गरिबको चमेली निसाफै हरायो. Goes, and the last line is like, दुधै कुण्ड पानीको सरोवर हुनुपर्छ चमेली सबैलाई बराबर. I wish I could play, but maybe later you can check. The essence of the song roughly translates as, the one who takes care of the cow has no milk. The one who is poor has nobody to speak for. The rooster on the roof is crowing that justice for the poor has gone missing. The wealthy has more wealth on top of wealth. The poor get more debt on top of their debt. Rich enjoy the luxuries while the poor suffer under the yoke of law. Then the song calls, like the evenness of the water in the Dudhkunda lake, all should be equal, or barabar. Barabar is the Nepali colloquial term for equality. The reality of inequality depicted in songs was akin to lived experience of many of us. The concept of barabar, or equality, as a goal gave a sense of direction, a meaningful path, and motivation for the future. The official version of harmony and the bravery bore romantic nostalgia, fanciful pride, or even arrogance, but no direction forward. Equality was a compelling concept. Over the years, equality was taken as a common agenda around which people mobilized themselves in different identities, as a proletariat, as a socialist, as Democrat, indigenous, Dalits, women, Madhesi, or other change makers. There may be different impasses and routes proposed, but the concept of equality provided a shared vision. Everybody found inspiration from the idea of equality. When I was doing my field research in early 2004, I asked a Maoist combatant, why did you join the rebellion? He said, for mukti, or emancipation. What do you see the situation when emancipated? I asked. And his answer was, quote, it is equality, the end of discrimination, freedom from inequality. Maoists have undergone significant changes over the period, but the concept of equality has endured over the last 5 decades. The above song by Ramesh, the song that I mentioned, first composed and performed in the 1970s with the metaphor of evenness of the Himalayan lake water, or for barabar, is reproduced in different forms. In a blockbuster movie called Balidan, in 1997, widely regarded as one of the greatest movies of all time in the history of Nepalese cinema. And recently, in performance by Balen Saha, current mayor of Kathmandu metropolitan city. Why does equality matter so much to the ordinary people in Nepal? Equality is deeply desired because of the people's past living experience influence in inequality. Since the formation of Nepali state in the middle of 18th century, through the end of autocratic panchayat regime in 1990, state rule has been militaristic, highly centralized, extractive, and family oligarchic. The regime institutionalized three forms of inequality based on class, caste, ethnicity, and gender. The king and the courtiers distinguished themselves as rulers and established feudal political and economic relationship, legalized discriminatory caste hierarchy, and embedded patriarchy. The first legal code of Nepal, enforced from the middle of 18th century, was a major tool for cementing all these three forms of inequality. In 1854, Rana Prime Minister Changabadur Rana, with help of his crew of 218 mostly upper caste members, set up the first law for the country known as Muluki-Ain. The legal code classified the entire population of the country into 5 categories, following caste hierarchy and principles of the purity and impurity. The first, on the top, was the group called Tagadhari, or the sacred thread-weaving caste, mainly Brahmins and Kshatris, including some upper caste Newars. And then comes the non-enslavable alcohol-drinking caste. Most of the ethnic or indigenous populations were divided as the lower caste alcohol-drinking caste, and they were further divided into enslavable and non-enslavable caste. And at the bottom were 2 groups, those who were classified as Dalit, water unacceptable but touchable caste, and water unacceptable, non-unstable, and untouchable caste, right? So there's 5 categories were based on the caste and was in a hierarchy. The Mulukian also classified people in terms of their roles and status within the political economic organization. The first category is that Vardar, or nobility, the people in the highest legislative, judicial, and political bodies who belong to royal collaterals of the political military leaders, mostly belonging to elite Thakuri Kshatri families. The second category is termed as Bhandari Kausal, who are assignees, civil servants, mainly cord wearers, and also non-enslavable alcohol drinkers. The other categories deployed were Dunia, or referring to the commoners of all castes and ethnic groups. And the next word, Sakar, or servants, serviceables, which virtually includes all castes, but is differentiated by status and status and yeah. Sorry, it. So the Mulukian, the Civil Code of 1854 accorded differential privileges and obligation to each caste and subcaste within the system. Different punishments for similar crimes were prescribed based on the respective caste ranks of the perpetrator and the victim. For example, depending on these rankings, punishment for the same crime could vary from execution to a small fine and a ritual bath. Conferral of higher political status to hereditary high caste is also associated with economic rewards and guarantee of material privilege. Members of the Vardars were the ones who received the land grant, often taken away from the prajas or the subjects, including authority to impose Kavi labor. Brahmins were generally exempt from the tax paying and also entitled for donations, including land grants. Sudras, or the Dalits, on the other hand, had to serve the higher caste as agricultural laborers, craftsmen, and so forth. The classification differentiated each group and conferred differential privileges. As I mentioned, the scheme was useful not only for extending control over the population, but also for distinguishing the ruler from the subjects and taxing them accordingly. As Prayagraj Sharma pointed out, the social value preached by the Mulukian proved to be a potent instrument for Rana political repression and for sanctifying privileges of Hindu high caste state-bearing elites over the next centuries to come. Mulukian 1854 was directly inspired by the Hindu Dharma Shastra and Niti Shastras, with several identical subjects heading from Manu Smriti. The caste hierarchy was portrayed as an ideal social or even cosmic order by the state elite. Hierarchy refers to the relation of domination and subordination, and it gains meaning in contrast to the idea of equality. Although the concept of equality may be found in the idea of Atma and Moksha, soul or liberation in the Hindu religious philosophy, hierarchy becomes a central feature when caste is embedded in the social religious fabric. Even Buddhism and indigenous egalitarian practices that reject or have no hierarchy are being forced to fit into the caste structure. The law was formally abolished in 1960, and the concept of equality before the law was introduced. The People's Movement in 1990 and 2006, together with mobilization of different groups, including Maoist rebellion, challenged the political ideology of inequality. The legacy of the law, nevertheless, continues and operates as an axiom in social relations in contemporary Nepal. It is still a key determinant of the material distribution in society and a person's life chances. Inequality is an indelible and inescapable structure. Equality then seems more a distant image than reality, a denial of hard truth about life, a dream world of attraction and aspiration. Yet, the notion of equality seems to provide a powerful energy that has enabled a dynamic process of democratization in the country. A look at the concept of equality in the landscape of Western social thought shows that equality is invariably a complex concept with no one definition. Human beings were considered unequal by nature up until the 18th century. In fact, the European colonial project was founded on the principle of human inequality. The Enlightenment ideas, however, ruptured this thinking. Drawing from early thinkers, Kant's moral philosophy postulated equal human moral worth and universal human capacity to self-regulate as a rational being. This led to the movement for recognition of the same freedom for all as a fundamental human right. Gradually, equality took the place as one of the most valued social ideals and hence a political claim. The French Revolution took equality along with the freedom and fraternity as a key goal and then inscribed it in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizens set by the French National Constituent Assembly in 1789. Equality stimulated anti-colonial resistance, political revolutions, and social movements, and were taken up by the modern constitutions. The concept of equality unifies the human beings along their differences. It should be noted that equality is not about being identical or the same, but it is about being similar in one or some respects. Equality is considered as a moral principle that fosters a good life and as a basis to ensure justice and dignity. Even those who are anti-egalitarian and disagree with the idea of the equality being of importance, who favors the freedom, agrees on the need of equal freedom or basic level playing field to be able to access liberty equally. The opinion differs, however, on the questions such as equality of what, equality with whom, and how to achieve and measure equality. The themes in the debates include issues of priority. Should the priority be given to redistribution or recognition? Whether to prioritize civil and political rights or to the economic, social, or cultural right, to the formal right or substantive rights, or to equality of opportunity only or equality of substance or outcomes. Or the question of whether only merit should prevail or affirmative actions be implemented for achieving equality. In addition, the place of collective rights and right to self-determination of the indigenous peoples has been in the key themes in the debate. These are some of the clauses that we find in Nepal's constitution. This is how Nepal defines nations and states. I'll go to language and then to the fundamental rights, list of the fundamental rights. We find the equality clauses in national constitution, statutes, and bylaws of subnational, local, and non-state entities. These equality clauses are informed by international human rights laws, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states all, quote, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights in Article 1. Equality governs the very idea of law as applicable to all citizens and informs all other laws. Equality is also, in legal terms, a freestanding law that guarantees human rights against discrimination, unequal treatment, and historical disadvantage. Constitutional laws are a way to push towards the translation of equality as moral principles and social ideals to an action-oriented guide. As David Bilchid, professor of constitutional law at the University of Johannesburg, says, quote, the push towards legal institutionalization also means that these ideas are not simply utopian in nature, resting in some sort of unrealistic moral universe. A right cannot be something that can never possibly be realized, unquote. Like other modern democratic constitutions, the 2015 Constitution of Nepal provides a list of fundamental rights with regard to equality. The number of fundamental rights guaranteed in 2007 interim constitution was 21. That was significant. A significant increase from 13 in the 1990 constitution. Although it is a document that emerged out of compromises, the 2015 Constitution of Nepal was more expansive in that regard, with 31 fundamental rights listed. I have classified those rights in 5 interlinked categories. 1, belonging to dignity. 2nd, belonging to freedom. 3rd, under the category of equality. 4th, under justice, and 5th, under capability. The list, as you can see, includes civil and political rights, as well as economic, social, and cultural rights. There are 3 particular aspects that I think are significant in the list. The first is the Constitution. The first is that the Constitution, for the first time, included a list of specific groups of the people to protect their equal rights: women, children, Dalits, and senior citizens. Another important point to be noted is that the right to equality also includes the right against discrimination, untouchability, and exploitation. Right to equality in Article 18, which states that all citizens shall be equal before the law and no person shall be denied the equal protection of the law, also clearly states in its sub clause that the state shall not discriminate among citizens on the grounds of origin, religion, race, caste, tribe, sex, economic condition, language, and geographical region. The Article 18 also states that the equality clause will not bar from making special provisions by laws for the protection, empowerment, or advancement of the women lagging behind socially and culturally. Dalits, Adivasi, Madhesi, Tharus, Muslim, oppressed class, backward communities, minorities, marginalized groups, peasants, laborers, youth, children, senior citizens, sexual minorities, persons with disability, and other people. This including the deprived Khas Arya member of the Khas Arya community. The Article 42, Article 1 on social justice outlines the provision for right to inclusion and affirmative action to exclude excluded groups in the state bodies. The fundamental rights that I mentioned is informed by the number of social and political movements. The key among them are indigenous peoples movement, Dalit movement, women's movement, and Madhesi movements. The armed rebellion by the Nepal Communist Party Maoist helped amplify and expand the agenda of the various social movements to political dialogue through a decade-long insurgency followed by people's mass movement in 2006. The indigenous movement in Nepal have been crucial in advocating for the rights and recognition of the country's diverse cultural groups. The movement demanded the protection of their unique cultures, language, and their land and territories. Key issues that they raised included land rights, self-determination, and the right to free, prior, and informed consent in the decisions affecting their communities. The movements also have sought to address the historical marginalization and discrimination, pushing for greater representation and participation in the political process. The activism of indigenous peoples led to increased awareness of their rights and influenced the inclusion of the provisions related to indigenous rights in the interim constitution 2007 and subsequent constitution of 2015. Despite the strong voice raised by the indigenous peoples, indigenous peoples themselves were not able to get included in the fundamental right as a particular group. Dalit movement was another very strong movement that influenced the 2015 constitution, especially long-standing struggle against caste-based discrimination and the untouchability was remarkable. Dalits have historically faced severe discrimination in all aspects of life, including social, economic, and political spheres. The movement demanded that the untouchability and the caste-based discrimination be ended. Simultaneously, women's organizations were actively advocating for their rights. Women's group pushed for gender equality and end to gender-based discrimination and greater representation in political process. The Constitution still has some clauses that are discriminatory in terms of gender equality, but the movement has really, in important ways, influenced the Constitution for incorporating the rights in the fundamental rights section. Madhes uprising is another important point in the history, political history of Nepal. The Madhesi people residing in the southern plains of Nepal voiced their long-standing grievances regarding regional disparities, political marginalization, and cultural discrimination. The movement's key demand included federalism, proportional representation in government, and constitutional recognition of their rights. Maybe I'll take a water a little bit. Um, right. These are some of the pictures from the movement that we have had in Nepal. The People's Movement 2 of 2016, also known as the April Revolution, was a mass movement that led to the end of the monarchy and the establishment of republic. The movement was driven by a broad coalition of political parties and civil society groups, all advocating for democracy, human rights, and an end to authoritarian rule. The success of the People's Movement 2 created political space and momentum for the constitution-making process. It further pushed for the inclusion of marginalized groups' rights in the interim constitution and later in 2015 constitution. So what has happened so far? All four movements of marginalized groups had specific priorities depending upon nature of operation, but there were certain commonalities in terms of the experience with and expectation from the state. All experienced exclusion in political decision-making, suffered from poverty and exploitation, and endured discrimination based on caste or ethnic identity, indigenous identity, and culture. The common theme in the demand by the marginalized groups on equality, I think, can be summed up in three key areas. Representation, redistribution, and recognition. The representation is about inclusion of representatives in the political decision-making and public bodies that reflect the diversity of the country's population. Redistribution is about equitable human development, including access to education, health services, employment, and basic services, amenities. Recognition, on the other hand, is about recognition of cultural diversity, collective right, self-determination, and also equality in how you treat each other, the human relationship. Available data shows that some progress has been made, but the pace is very slow, although the principle of proportional representation was not fully adopted, because for the enhancement of the representation or inclusion of the people from different groups, full proportional electoral system was proposed. But the constitution, when it was promulgated, only adopted mixed system. Despite the fact the number of representatives from different groups seems to have increased after the adoption of this policy. In Nepal, for those of you who are new, the broad social groups are, as I mentioned, Dalits, who are considered as, in the past, as untouchables, at the bottom of the caste hierarchy. And then you have got the indigenous nationalities, and then Brahmin and Kshatriyas, basically upper caste population, and then Muslim and other groups, right? So if you can see from this chart as that, as compared to the situation in 1991 and 94, the representation in the parliament has to great extent increased, except for the Dalits. Dalits, it was almost like non-existent in 1991, 1994, has increased up to 5-6%. The total population of Dalit in Nepal is about 13%. If you want to see the representation in the civil service, you can see the similar sort of situation, that the disparity is quite stark, and indigenous peoples and the Dalits are quite behind in terms of their presence in the civil service. these figures are based on the survey that we conducted from Tribhuvan University in 2012 and 2018. The poverty has declined over the period that we can see from this chart. But interesting point that I wanted to mention here is that the pace, the speed of reduction of the poverty is different for different groups. For example, for Dalits, the speed is slow. For many of these indigenous groups, the poverty reduction rate is slow. But for others, it is much faster. And also you can see, although poverty has declined for almost all of the groups, the inequality pattern or the trend of the inequality almost is same as you compare to the past, 20 years ago. So we are doing okay, but looks like in terms of achieving equality, there are a number of challenges we still face. In terms of recognition, we looked at one of the issue at the discrimination. To what extent people today experience that they are being discriminated in everyday life. This slide looks at the gives the for example, more than 1/3 of Dalit reported the experience of being badly treated in the community. They were denied of sitting together while eating and discriminated from the government services and offices. Almost every week, you will see one news of how the case of the untouchability occurs in Nepal. The recognition, however, is not limited to discrimination, non-discrimination. In the case of indigenous peoples, recognition of language, culture, their festivals and ceremonies, heritage are important aspects. The Constitution paves the way for working on this, but they need to be put into practice by making new laws and policies, including by the provincial and local government bodies. The demand for naming of the provinces and autonomous regions in line with the indigenous linguistic heritage was one of the proposals in this regard put forward by the indigenous peoples. Recognition of cultural diversity is basically a matter of expanding symbolic domain of the state by incorporating cultural symbols, signs, names, heritage, and history of the residing groups. Official recognition of festivals, ceremonies, cultural sites, food, dress, and other intangible cultural heritage as part of the national culture is central to such an expansion of the symbolic sphere. Nepal has already embarked on the process of recognizing cultural diversity by announcing national holidays for various festivals and ceremonies by the indigenous groups. One of the examples that I would like to give is the new anthem that replaced the old one as an admired example of such a symbolic recognition of diversity. The previous anthem was about praising or glorifying the king and wishing the greatness of the king. But after the new constitution, the anthem was changed to celebrate the diversity of the country. Incorporation of history, culture, heroes, icons of the diverse groups in national identity, along the redesigning of educational curriculum and rewriting of the history are part of such program. Indigenous nationalities, with their cultural and historical attachment to the territory, demand federal arrangements that can address the issues of cultural recognition. On conclusion, what I want to say, on 20 September 2015, President Ram Baran Yadav officially promulgated the Constitution of Nepal. arguably fast-tracked by the devastating earthquake of 20 April 2015. The promulgation of new constitution received mixed response from the public as well as international community. It was celebrated by some section of the population and criticized by others. There were protests in several regions, notably in Tarai Madhes, in response to which India imposed an economic blockade, leaving a grave impact on Nepal's economy. Legal analysis of the new constitution from the perspective of the indigenous people's rights found it to be exclusionary on various counts. Constituent Assembly ignored the long process of deliberation and agreements that had been reached in the first Constituent Assembly, which would have provided a strong basis for accommodating indigenous people's concerns. 10 years on, Nepal also provides important lessons and insights on the underexplored implementation phase of the constitution building. In the last 9 years, Nepal has successfully conducted 2 general elections in 2017 and 2022. All 7 provincial and 753 local governments are up and running. Nepali political space has begun to look comparatively more inclusive and representative of its diversity, with considerable number of women and historically marginalized and excluded groups reclaiming their place at the decision making. More than 300 laws have been amended and are newly developed to support the implementation of federal and constitutional system. To a certain extent, the adjustment of civil servants and transfer of assets and infrastructures to the newly established federal units has been accomplished. Implementing the 2015 Constitution has come with challenges, however. Political instability at the federal level has persisted, with new implications for provincial governments as frequent changes in the national level government has affected the stability of the provincial governments. Subnational units are struggling to fulfill their responsibilities amidst fiscal constraints, institutional capacity constraints, and lack of clarity around the division of power between the levels of government. Path dependency and centralizing tendency have consistently manifested in the attitudes and actions of the federal government. Examples include the disregard of subnational autonomy, delay in the formation of key framework legislations facilitating the devolution of power, and disinterest in intergovernmental relations. This has contributed to the development of narratives about useless, quote, useless, unquote, provincial governments, with public as well as political calls for scrapping the provincial spirit altogether. To add to the implementation challenges, dissatisfaction within the general populace is on the rise, with the advent of alternative politics, coupled with the populist experiments. Of late, issues such as foreign labor migration and mass exodus of youths abroad in search of a better future have gained significant public attention. The commitment of political actors to inclusion and equality is tested regularly through the exploitation of loopholes in the electoral laws by political parties, including the recent call for constitutional amendment to scrap or limit the proportional electoral system on the basis that it contributes to political instability. Despite the weakness and challenges of implementation, the 2015 Constitution of Nepal did take some positive steps concerning democratization. The Constitution reaffirmed that Nepal is multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious, multicultural country that defines itself as a secular, inclusive, federal democratic republican state. More importantly, the affirmation of the concept of equality in fundamental rights in 2015 Constitution is a crucial achievement. This was made possible by the social and political mobilization of indigenous peoples and other disadvantaged communities around the country. The replacement of the past ideology of inequality by egalitarian principles in turn generates vitality and activates agency of the people to engage in the dynamic process of democratization. The process has expanded the concept of equality in Nepal to include multiple dimensions of living, from representation, redistribution, and recognition, including notion of self-determination. Dream of equal rights, collectively produced in Nepal over the last 5 decades, is an optimistic idea that pushes and challenges state and society to do better for translating the moral principle into practice in the face of imperfect reality. Thank you.
Now we have time for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, I'd like to welcome. Okay, so we have one question here. And if you don't mind introducing yourself.
I'm Aman. I work here in BC Public Service. So one of my question is that increasingly since the coming of the Constitution in the politics, there has been increasing fragmentation. And so you mentioned that there is a mixed system in Nepal, and sometimes the argument is that in the proportional, set where the seats are allocated, there is more fragmentation there. And because why I'm talking about political fragmentation is because that is seen to be one of the biggest reason for the lack of economic development. Because for economic development, stability, political stability is required. So how do you see the Constitution, how facilitating this? So to have more political stability and more economic development.
Yeah. Would you like to take more
Okay, sure.
questions or?
Sure, whatever.
Okay, so I can, I think we can take 2 more, first here and second over there.
Thank you, Dr. Lama, for your very comprehensive address. Your presentation covered it all. My name is Dhruvan Rasali. I'm adjunct professor at the School of Population and Public Health at UBC, and I'm a Nepali, also belonging to the what is so-called the lowest, the people of lowest stratum in Nepal, and have been watching all these development right from the beginning, right from my childhood to now. And this Constitution of Nepal, 2015, has given some relief to the people who have been oppressed for centuries. And this was a beacon of hope. At the same time, what is happening is there are constitutional provisions which are fantastic. Basically, it envisages such a wonderful idea of equality and building a egalitarian society in the long run. But from the start of the Constitution implementation, there has been a lot of problems because the ruling class are always the same. This proportional representation is hardly touching the surface of the people who need to be represented. They are not even coming to the point where it makes a critical mass. Talk of fragmentation is actually a non-starter for this kind of situation, because what the Constitution envisages is really the idea of self-determination and self-governance. If in the name of fragmentation, if we see only the same ruling class, who are actually a minority, still ruling the country. That is not going to go anywhere. Especially you showed the National Inclusion Survey, social inclusion survey data from 2012 and 2018. I'm a profuse user of that data. Actually, the whole project was in a leadership at TU, Tribhuvan University. Thank you so much for doing such a wonderful job. They provide really the baseline where we should go. You can see one of the chart on the composite in social exclusion data. The chart, the gap is so huge. It is like 10 times higher. Tarai Dalits and Hill Dalits are discriminated more than 12 times than the Brahmins and Kshatris. And that to fill that gap, it takes years, decades. But at least there should be some start to do something action. And my question is, where do you see all that gap, how this gap can be narrowed down in a progressively increasing manner? I could have many questions, but I don't want to take much time.
Okay, one more question here. Okay. All right, so we can start with those two.
Okay, yeah. Yes, but
Yeah, I'll keep this.
Thank you for your question. The political stability, election, and economic development. These are kind of three different set of issues. But in Nepal, what happens was that the political party leaders who not really favor the change, who did not like the inclusiveness of the political party and parliament and political parties, what they started saying is that political instability is caused by the inclusion of diverse members from different groups, which came through the proportional electoral system. So my answer to your question is that actually the kind of diagnosis that these political leaders are making for the instability is incorrect. The instability is actually caused by the infight or the operation of the political party themselves. At one point, like 2017 election, the Communist Party won majority vote, but even after this majority vote, they were not able to run the government for the full term. Because of the infight, they dissolved the parliament. They tried to dissolve at least. So the source of instability is different, and it's not actually the diversity of the representation. And therefore, the economic development is, I think, the separate issue. Once you have got ability, stability, and clearly think about the what kind of economic policy is required, only then you get the economic development, right? So that's one. And on Dr. Dorna's question, I mean, like it's a really difficult one, how to get the pace faster in reducing the gap. One of the arguments that I'm trying to make is like, the notion of equality, if everybody, can operate with that notion, with agency, with, and that would be the only energy, only force that can bring the process forward, right? I think if you look at the situation that we arrived today, it is because of that movement, that idea that mobilized themselves, people came into collective action, and then only can change, right? So how we can activate that is what I would think is the primary factor that will determine the speed of the change.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. I am a PhD candidate at UBC Asian Studies, and I'm from Bangladesh, and I'm from one of the indigenous communities from there. So my question to you that, so in Nepal, the constitution recognizes indigenous peoples. So my question is like, does this recognition of the indigenous people in Nepal like how much it has been supportive in real life rather than in like recognizing the indigenous people in the constitution. So yeah, like how do we see that? Thank
Yeah.
you.
Right. I agree with your, your doubt. It's in the paper, but how really is the recognition, kind of coming into practice, and what kind of positive result that it has got. I think, if you compare the history of democratization in Nepal, like, until 1950, we were in a very sort of a dark period, not only until 1950s. We had a very limited opening between 1950 and 60, and then we had this autocratic king, which ruled until 1990. So anything that you talk about right or equality would be punished. So we have a very small, period that people actually exercise their democratic, rights. So in that sense, the achievement so far, what we have got in terms of, indigenous people's rights, is that the state has recognized at least that, indigenous peoples exist and they need to be recognized. They are being historically, marginalized, and the state needs to, put additional efforts to address this question. So although this is only rhetorical, only in the paper, but this provides the basis for the mobilization, for the jurisprudence. If you want to go to the court, and if you want to bring the issues in international arena and pressurize your government. So this all is a kind of tool, provides the space for going further. So the demand of the indigenous peoples are many. Like, for example, they would like to secure the right over their land and natural territories. They would like to have a self-governance, self-determination right, and all of the issues. This constitution has denied all of those things. This only so far recognizes that, okay, indigenous peoples exist. So that's the kind of level. When you compare with other countries like India or maybe Bangladesh or Canada, I'm interested in comparing the situation in Nepal, India, Bolivia, and Canada. One of the projects that I'm really interested in is I'm learning very much in how Canada is working further on the indigenous policies. So it's a challenge that that both parties, indigenous peoples themselves and also the state, should take up.
Any other questions?
Can I do one more?
Okay. First, second, and third.
Thank you so much. And it was wonderful to hear all of your thoughts. I really liked how you developed the idea of equality. Barabar is something that has been an aspiration for a long time in Nepal. And so I guess I'm just wondering a few things. First of all, about the difference between equality and equity. That's something that comes into both, policy and academic conversations here quite often. And so I guess I'm just wondering about the translation of Barabar as equality instead of equity. And, if you have any reflections on that. And, then the second question linking to that is, this whole idea of equity, diversity, and inclusion, like on our campuses here and elsewhere, and how and that's a concept that's coming under attack from a lot of different angles right now. So I guess I'm wondering if you're also seeing that kind of backlash or dynamic in Nepal, where that idea is no longer considered a shared aspiration, or if you see kind of attitudes towards it shifting over time.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Lama, the one question I had in my mind is just last week, actually this week I have been looking at the data from varieties of democracy. I just pull out Nepal chart and compared with different countries. What we see is there have been different time points, like 1950, 1846, Rana took over autocratic and ran a autocratic familial rule. That time, the human rights issue were level of human rights went way down. Then sometime in 1950s and early 1950, there was uprising and we got democracy. That time, the human rights level went up. Then sometime in 1960, there was a general election. After that, there was a short period of time, about 18 months. That time, the graph showed the human rights level, measured by some indexes, went quite high up during that election period. Then King Mahendra took over the reign again, and he became again autocratic king. That time, so it went down. Then how many years he ruled as Panchayat system? Then in 1990, there was uprising and people democracy. There was a constitutional monarchy. That time, again, it went up. Then in a brief period of time, the former king Gyanendra also took over. He could the country. He deposed the prime minister in 2012. That time, again, it fell down. So it is so much correlated with human rights. And many people don't understand this equality and equity concepts, general people. But if we, the human rights issues are something international and globally, as Nepal is a signatory of Declaration of Human Rights and all covenants of the UN based on human rights. And that is, Nepal has a national obligation. Actually, what I'm seeing is for proper implementation of the constitution, current constitution of Nepal, if we route it towards a human rights approach, probably it might be a feasible idea to go and again go forward, move forward and gain some momentum. Otherwise, people have different kind. Nepal is a very, very traditional society hung up in mythological Hindu religion. And they want to get back the Nepal as a Hindu state now. There is some uprising going on. General people have very hard to understand what's going on. Whereas there are designers who want to be, as you said, there are rulers. All the oligarchs were ruling the country. Same people wants to grab the power. Right now, that's the movement is going on. But I think if we take the route of human rights approach, probably it might be a feasible, practical idea to move forward so that this constitution can move ahead. Thank you. What do you think about
Yeah.
Last question.
All right. Kia ora. Thank you very much for coming here and giving us this. It's very well done. That preamble to the Constitution is very evocative and it's well written. I mean, there's not a single typo in the whole thing, and it stands for a very democratic and participatory kind of society. But in my view, you might have to give up the notion of formal education as some kind of a solution to what he called the gap and embrace a very broad-based notion of lifelong learning. These people know that they're discriminated against, and they know they show up on your graphs. And actually the solution, the gap, will not be solved by sending them off to business schools or chalk and talk, top-down authoritarian schools, private or public. They need an entirely different way of thinking about this. And actually, you're in luck because you've got a few allies all over the world who know a lot about this. And these allies are Indigenous people who've been through very similar kind of circumstances. And you probably should be talking to them. You know, when I came here in 1974, Vancouver Indigenous people were quite excited because there was a founding conference of the World Society for Indigenous Education. It was held in Port Alberni, of all places, on Vancouver Island, because the First Nations chiefs over there were very keen to do this. Man, there was Indigenous people there from all over the world. Lapps from northern, about as far into the Arctic as you can go, you know, from Scandinavia. Aboriginal Australians from Alice Springs and other such places. Maoris from New Zealand. First Nations from all across North America. And other Indigenous people from Asian and European countries. So with that as a sort of a backdrop, I think there is something that could be done about this. And the first thing would be, do you have any Indigenous allies in other parts of the world who have faced this kind of these problems of exclusion and discrimination on the basis of idiotic variables like caste, gender, sexual preferences, and all the other isms? You need to talk to those other people. You need to talk to Musqueam. Some of my students are down there. They're the teachers. You need to talk to my old ex-student Michael Omalewa in Nigeria. After he left UBC, the Faculty of Education, Adult Education Department, he became the president of the UNESCO General Conference. By the time I was ready to go and work at UNESCO, he was the boss. So needless to say, I would get very elaborate lunches out on the River Seine paid for by UNESCO. UNESCO long ago started nurturing this notion of lifelong learning. After the war, these countries that were winning their independence sort of looked around and realized that the colonial education system that was left behind in the remnants of the war was not going to be suitable for rural people, mostly working in agricultural kind of fields, in order to build the sort of society that they needed. That was technologically sophisticated and improved the economy, but was capable, but tended to respect and celebrate and foster learning about Indigenous ways of living your life, not just land acknowledgements and other ritualistic things, but the whole bailiwick of what it means to be an Indigenous person. When I see the names of the various people at the foot of your graphs there, Dalits and so on, Muslims, this percent, blah, 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 I sort of think, God, I want to go there and get those people in a room with big pieces of paper and felt pens and put a bunch of questions in front of them, break them into groups and say, right, you've got 20 minutes to answer that question. You guys on this question, put it up on the wall and give us your feedback. People working together within a frame of reference that fits where they come from, sensitive and relevant to the context of learning. I'm a Canadian delegate to UNESCO, and I have met a few Nepalese, a guy called Lek Belbase. I don't know where he came from, but he's the only delegate I've ever seen that's come from Nepal to UNESCO. And the UNESCO Institute of Lifelong Learning in Hamburg, if the bosses of that place were sitting here, they'd be going nuts about how we're going to get this guy involved. You're looking at the watch. How are we going to get Nepal involved in this? There's a big raft of publications, some of them written by me, about learning villages, learning cities. In Hangzhou, China, there's a learning police station, I know, because I created it. Policemen committed to learning is the #1 option. Yeah, I know, shut up. Pasanga's telling me you won't get to the top of the mountain by talking too much. So we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in this country, 2015, Murray Sinclair, one of our heroes. And that commission has exposed a very similar problem in Canada. And unfortunately, the commissioners who were appointed to help Sinclair write this tended to have PhDs from fancy places like Harvard, Yale, Princeton. They were not from adult education. So as a result, when you look in the index, the 94 calls to action, the recommendations, the words learning and community, the words lifelong learning, the words learning from each other are not even in the index, let alone part of the analysis that the 9 volumes of that report came up with. You talk to my Musqueam friends, I'll tell you the same thing. We need to learn from each other in participatory and respectful, culturally authentic ways. You too. You don't have to answer that question, just
Thank
get
you.
it done by next weekend.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
so maybe we'll do the answers and then do the last round of Q&A.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you, Sarah, for your points. On equality and equity, my understanding is that equity is about how to approach equality. Basically, the idea that treat all equal is the kind of formal, the idea. But what equity would say is that since the reality is unequal, then teaching equal to unequal situation would actually produce the inequality. Therefore, you recognize the different situation and treat accordingly so that the outcome is equal. So I would think that equity is approach to equality. But what is equality? Again, we can discuss, like, for example, the basic minimum of the, the material need, situation needed for accessing liberty or, enjoying the rights. So that can be one approach. So there are various differences how to define the equality. The second question is very complex. I think there are 2 ways that in Nepal we experience the attack against the EDI. One is the direct kind, like the one that we just had, the royalist coming and saying that we want king back. We'd like Nepal to make again Hindu kingdom. We want to, go back to the autocratic system. That is one kind of direct kind of attack on EDI. But more dangerous is the indirect kind. Like, for example, they would say that because of the EDI, we are having instability, and therefore we didn't have the economic prosperity. Therefore, we need to scrap this. We need authoritarian kind of rule. So that's sort of, in the backlash coming with the democratic grab or with the justification for something else is much more dangerous. But I think the struggle is going on in Nepal. That it seems like the people who would like to go back is not going to find their way very easy. So there will be the different group of people fighting for that. On your question, I think, yes, the human rights approach is very useful. But one of the challenges for this is that I think the human rights approach, actually, if we go back, maybe it was installed after Second World War with the UN and everything, what international order that we see today. And the liberalism and everything that West has practiced. I guess the whole system now is being kind of is being challenged. I think the Professor Chering and we were talking about that, right? I mean, if the system that you have built around the right, human rights and liberalism and all those things are kind of crumbling, then how do we, a country like Nepal, which are really in margin, think about it, So I think that's a sort of, if we want to put ourselves in the international context, what's happening, So that's kind of a little bit challenging thing. If the question of liberal rights itself is in a kind of a crisis, then is it just because that the system here in West is trying to go back to pre-1945 or pre-Second World War situation, or it's something new is coming? So I think we have to also take into account how do we look our situation in that context too. But I think the concept of equality, whether you take that as right or not, but that is very important, that very powerful sort of concept that you can operate, which can mobilize people for their right. So that can be a hope. So I guess thank you for your comment. I do not have much to offer, actually. We'll continue the talk. Thank you.
I'll get some Maoris, I'll come and help you.
All right. On only one thing that I wanted to say is that I really believe in the international cooperation. One of the things that I distinguish indigenous peoples movement compared to the ethno-nationalist movement is that unlike ethno-nationalist movement, which would like to have their own state, separate state, Khalistan and things like that, but indigenous peoples movement has got the international, solidarity. And despite the fact that the history and the context is different, they have a common experience and they can work together. And this is one thing that I see as a new phenomenon coming in the world. So indigenous movement also is kind of offering different alternatives to the liberalism, to the conservatism, even Marxism, right? So I think the international cooperation is a coordination and working together is very important for the indigenous peoples. That's one of the features. So that's one reason that I wanted to learn from different countries. Yeah.
I think this kind of relates to what you are talking about right now. Thank you for your presentation, by the way. It was very insightful. I think I kind of find myself in a paradox because I am Nepalese, but I came to Canada when I was very young, and I actually work at the Canadian federal government for some Indigenous initiatives. And you did mention that you wanted to look further into Indigenous policies in Canada. Was there anything in particular that you were looking for, wanted to dissect? That was just my question.
Yeah. Thank you. I was interested in looking at particularly the policies and the practices around self-governance, because one of the very central idea of the indigenous people's rights has been the concept of sovereignty and self-determination. Like I just mentioned, ethno-nationalist movement would say that we'll have a separate state and then we'll do that, right? But indigenous peoples are saying that we would like to have our right to self-determination within the structure of the state, right? So also there's a diversity within the indigenous communities, right? So this is one of the things that we're struggling in Nepal too. I'm interested in specifically learning about that situation, but also the broader, context. I wanted to compare, what are the commonalities between indigenous situation in Nepal and Canada, and what are the distinctive features. So these are the two things. Maybe I can ask your help to connect. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we've come to the end of this program. I want to thank everyone for your patience and just attention to the conversation here, and also thank the speaker for presenting such a wonderful talk and a long, rich body of research. I know you've been working on this and similar ideas and issues for a very long time, so we are really fortunate to be here in audience listening to your work. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
So before you leave, we still have animals outside. Chicken and vegetable.
Yes, and if you're still thinking about the Nepali class or language class or the Tibetan language class, I encourage you to sign up and also share it with your friends if you think there might be anyone who's interested.